You are now watching Sacred Seat TV. Hey goddesses, it's your favorite self-discovery guru. Today we'll be discussing the endocrine system. So the endocrine system is a complex network of glands and organs. It uses hormones to control and coordinate your body's metabolism, energy level, reproduction, growth and development, and your response to injury, stress, and mood. Check out this brief video that does a great job of summarizing what this system is and how it works.
I'm talking about the endocrine system. The endocrine system consists of structures that secrete hormones. That could be at the cellular level or the organ level, but a big focus for the system and for this video is on glands. Now, some of the major glands in the endocrine system also have non-endocrine duties that we won't be going into, and some of these glands are also classified as organs in their roles with other body systems. Okay, so endocrine glands. We'll start with in the brain. Hypothalamus, pineal gland, pituitary gland. Those are all found in the brain. In the neck area, thyroid and parathyroid, and farther down in the upper chest, the thymus. Above your kidneys, the adrenal glands. Near the stomach, the pancreas. Gonads. The gonads are reproductive glands. Ovaries, which are part of the female reproductive system. Testes, which are part of the male reproductive system. Now, two things to point out about all these glands. Number one, we're focusing on endocrine function and not exocrine in this video. What's the difference? Well, endocrine gland function means they are going to release hormones right into their surroundings. They have no special ducts to carry things away. Exocrine glands have ducts that carry whatever is secreted into a body opening or body surface, like sweat glands, or mammary glands, which produce milk. Sometimes a gland that has endocrine function can also have exocrine function. The pancreas, for example. The pancreas is using its endocrine function when it's releasing insulin or glucagon, which deals with blood sugar. More on that later, but it has exocrine function when it secretes pancreatic enzymes through accessory ducts into the small intestine. And number two, yes, these are major endocrine glands that we mentioned, but there are also cells within organs that can have endocrine functions. Want an example? Okay, remember when we had talked about the stomach in the digestive system? We presented some examples of enzymes and hydrochloric acid as part of the gastric juice in the stomach, but we didn't discuss a hormone that helps make the secretion of stomach acid possible. Gastrin is one of those hormones, and there are specific cells in the stomach that can secrete it. So now that we've mentioned that, and we've given a little tour of the glands, it's time to talk about hormones. There are different classes of hormones, and while that's not our focus, realize that they can be derived from different biomolecules, such as amino acids, or a full chain of amino acids, otherwise known as a polypeptide, or lipids, like in the case of steroids. And it's important to realize that because it turns out what hormones are made of, meaning what makes up the hormone structure, is going to influence the hormone function. By function, that includes the receptors the hormones bind to. Hormones generally bind to specific target cells. And then the target cells will do some kind of action. Maybe they'll increase the rate of mitosis or prepare certain enzymes for action. That's a lot of responses a target cell can take. So we're going to go through the glands, but again, this time we're going to mention some major hormones associated with each gland and some general functions. Alright, in the brain, you can consider the hypothalamus pituitary region to be a sort of complex because they are the boss of pretty much the rest of the endocrine system. The pituitary gland, and you can divide that into the anterior, meaning towards the front, and posterior, meaning here towards the back. So anterior and posterior pituitary stems off of the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus makes several hormones, and the posterior pituitary holds on to them, and then secretes those hormones. So the posterior pituitary doesn't make its own hormones. The amazing anterior pituitary, on the other hand, can make its own hormones, but it's still very regulated by the hypothalamus. The posterior pituitary will secrete oxytocin, important for uterine contractions when one is having a baby, an antidiuretic hormone that stimulates the kidneys to reabsorb water. And for the anterior pituitary, here's a few. Growth hormone, as its name suggests, it promotes growth. Prolactin promotes producing milk from mammary glands. Thyroid stimulating hormones stimulates the thyroid to release thyroid hormone. Follicle stimulating hormone stimulates gonads to make gametes. Luteinizing hormone stimulates gonads to make androgens. And adrenocorticotropic hormone, very long name for a hormone, that one stimulates the adrenal cortex to release hormones. So you can see why this hypothalamus pituitary complex is an important one. What about the little pineal gland? Don't underestimate its importance. It secretes melatonin, which helps regulate circadian rhythm, which involves our sleep-wake cycle. The thyroid, shaped like a beautiful butterfly that sits just under the larynx and wraps around the trachea, sitting in front of the trachea, it makes T4 and T3. These hormones can have major roles in metabolic processes. The thyroid also makes calcitonin, which can lower the blood calcium level. The parathyroid glands sit posterior, in the back here. The parathyroid gland releases parathyroid hormone, which actually raises blood calcium level. What's with the blood calcium? Calcium levels are involved in cell signaling, among many other things. Okay, so now down to the thymus. Some endocrine diagrams don't include the thymus. It may be because in adulthood, the thymus tends to shrink down and it's not as active as a person ages. But before puberty, when T-cell development is especially active, the thymus is very important as an organ for the site of T-cell maturity. And as a gland, the thymus does make hormones that impact immune system function. Thymosin, which can stimulate the making of T-cells, is an example. Okay, now take a look at these adrenal glands above the kidneys. Adrenal glands have two major parts, the adrenal medulla and the adrenal cortex. The adrenal medulla secretes epinephrine and norepinephrine, which are involved in several body responses, including the fight or flight response. The adrenal cortex secretes hormones known as glucocorticoids. The hormone cortisol is an example. Cortisol can increase blood glucose levels and plays major roles with stress and inflammation. The adrenal cortex can also release mineralocorticoids. The hormone aldosterone is an example. It's critical for the reabsorption of sodium and the excretion of potassium when we were talking about the nephrons in the kidneys. Pancreas. So after your food is digested, you need to get the glucose, that's a sugar, from the blood into your body's cells. The hormone insulin is made by your pancreas, and insulin tells the body cells to take in glucose. Without it, your cells don't have the glucose they need to survive, a reason that a person with diabetes may need to take insulin if their pancreas is not functioning normally. The pancreas also makes glucagon. That helps raise the blood glucose level. One way it can do that is by stimulating the liver to convert its glycogen to glucose. And last, the gonads. Ovaries make estrogen. Generally, estrogen promotes uterine lining growth and female secondary sex characteristics. Ovaries also make progesterone, which also promotes uterine lining growth, and it keeps it maintained, which is critical for fetal development. The testes make androgens. An example of an androgen is testosterone. Androgens help with making sperm cells and the development of male secondary sex characteristics. We do want to point out that estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone are generally present and serve functions in all individuals. However, estrogen and progesterone are generally in higher concentrations with major functions in females, whereas androgens are generally in higher concentrations with major functions in males. So, we toured through some endocrine glands and the hormones they make. The hormones act as chemical signals so the target cells can perform some sort of action. The response time can be slow or fast, and the distance the hormones travel to reach their target cells might be short or long. We want to just give a little reminder that hormones aren't the only form of signaling in the body. The nervous system, which needs its own video, uses electrical signaling and chemical signaling in the form of neurotransmitters. Generally, nervous system signaling will be for short distances and has a very fast response time. Finally, in talking about why the endocrine system is so important, let's consider an example of when it is not functioning normally. In hypothyroidism, the thyroid gland is underactive. This can have many causes which can impact how it's treated, but generally in hypothyroidism, the thyroid isn't producing enough thyroid hormones. Recall that the thyroid hormones have major roles in metabolic processes. Therefore, someone with hypothyroidism may experience extreme fatigue, a slowed heart rate, and other symptoms. Sometimes an individual with this condition can also have a higher than normal level of thyroid-stimulating hormone because their anterior pituitary is trying to stimulate their underactive thyroid. An endocrinologist is a physician that specializes in conditions of the endocrine system, and their treatment plan for hypothyroidism may include receiving replacement thyroid hormone. See our further reading suggestions for more examples.
All right, I hope you enjoyed that clip. I'm going to talk a little bit about unbalances within the endocrine system. So to fix an unbalanced endocrine system, what you want to focus on are basic lifestyle changes. That would be your diet. What are you eating? Are you moving your body? Exercise. What kind of stress you're dealing with? Are you managing your stress? Are you doing meditation or yoga? Are you doing any type of self-care? And also sleep. Sleep is one of the most important ones because this does have to do with your brain. And if your brain is getting the correct amount of rest, it can function the way that it needs to. What you want to do is focus on those. If you're able to get those down and regulate it in a healthy manner according to what we need as human beings, and you're not seeing any improvements, then the next thing you want to do is consult your healthcare professional for medical guidance and treatment options. Since this is a hormonal system, what you can do is ask your medical care providers for a test of your hormone functions in the body. And you could just ask them for a blood panel and then create a follow-up visit to discuss the results with them. Now, I do realize that as a woman, it's a little bit hard to capture what our hormones are doing, just on a random day. So I'm not sure how it works, but it may end up being a situation where you have to go back a few times to see what your hormones are doing throughout the months. But I will say it is important that you go to the doctor if you need to and request the information that you need. Nobody's going to do it for you. So just make sure that you're taking charge of your health. So how does anxiety affect the endocrine system? I have included 2 videos here that explain a little bit about that and the HPA axis. Check it out.
Given moment, but one of the big ones, one that's really worth understanding, is the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, or the HPA axis, because you don't want to have to say that every time. This is a complex series of interactions between 3 glands that ultimately regulates lots of your body's daily processes, like digestion, sexuality, immune response, and how you handle stress. And it's complex not just because of all the glands involved, it's also one of the more crucial instances of your endocrine system coordinating with your nervous system. Specifically, it's behind that fight or flight response that everybody keeps talking about. The HPA axis is essentially the endocrine system's companion to the sympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic system, in times of high stress, does things like speed up your heart rate and direct blood away from your digestive organs into the muscles. But many of the other effects of the stress response are carried out by your endocrine system, and getting your nervous and endocrine systems to work together in times of crisis is where the hypothalamus comes in. It's the hub of where the 2 systems meet. It keeps tabs on what's going on all over your body, analyzing your blood for signs that something might be off. So let's revisit our fight or flight scene from a few lessons ago, the old burning house scenario. So you're sleeping. You're dreaming about petting pandas with Emma Watson or whatever when the smoke alarm goes off. Well, action potentials in your brain trigger neurons in your hypothalamus to release the peptide hormone CRH, or corticotropin-releasing hormone. The CRH makes the very short trip through the bloodstream to the anterior pituitary gland where, because it is water-soluble, it binds to receptors on the outside of its target cells. There, it triggers the release of adrenocorticotropic hormone, or ACTH. The ACTH travels again through the bloodstream to the adrenal cortices of the adrenal glands on top of your kidneys. When the ACTH binds to receptors on cells in an adrenal cortex, it triggers the release of a frenzy of different freak-out compounds known as glucocorticoid and mineralocorticoid hormones. Typically, these hormones help us deal with day-to-day stress by keeping our blood sugar and blood pressure balanced. But under major stress, like waking up in a burning building stress, these hormones, like cortisol, cause the classic fight or flight response, ramping up your blood pressure, dumping glucose into your bloodstream, shutting down non-emergency services like your immune system and sperm and egg development. And guess what? Now that all these stress hormones are pulsing through your blood, the hypothalamus back in the brain senses them. And because its job is to monitor and maintain balance whenever possible, it then stops secreting CRH, which eventually causes the other glands to stop secreting their panic hormones.
Welcome to 2-Minute Neuroscience, where I explain neuroscience topics in 2 minutes or less. In this installment, I will discuss the HPA axis. The hypothalamic pituitary adrenal, or HPA, axis is best known for its role in our body's reaction to stress. The HPA axis includes a group of hormone-secreting glands from the nervous and endocrine systems, the hypothalamus, pituitary gland, and adrenal glands. The hypothalamus is a small neuroendocrine structure situated just above the brainstem that controls the release of hormones from the pituitary gland, a hormone-secreting gland that sits just below the hypothalamus. The pituitary gland can release hormones into the bloodstream to reach a variety of targets. In the case of the HPA axis, hormones released from the pituitary gland travel down to the kidneys and influence the secretion of hormones from endocrine glands called the adrenal glands, which sit on top of the kidneys. The primary function of the HPA axis is to regulate the stress response. When we experience something stressful, the hypothalamus releases a hormone called corticotropin-releasing hormone, or CRH. CRH signals the pituitary gland to secrete a hormone called adrenocorticotropic hormone, or ACTH, into the bloodstream. ACTH travels down to the adrenal glands where it prompts the release of a hormone called cortisol from the cortex or outer layer of the adrenal glands. The release of cortisol causes a number of changes that help the body to deal with stress. For example, it helps to mobilize energy like glucose, so the body has enough energy to cope with a prolonged stressor. When cortisol levels in the blood get high, this is sensed by receptors in areas of the brain like the hypothalamus and hippocampus, which leads to the shutting off of the stress response through what is known as a negative feedback mechanism.
All right, I hope you enjoyed those 2 clips. So what happens when the HPA axis is out of balance? So chronic stress and other factors that can lead to the dysregulation of the HPA axis result in elevated cortisol levels, a reduction of your cortisol levels, and increased ACTH levels. So the increase of the ACTH levels can indicate you have some type of pituitary issue, mainly a tumor. If you have a reduction in your cortisol levels, that can be seen as adrenal fatigue or insufficiency. And if you have elevated cortisol levels, that's usually associated with conditions such as Cushing's syndrome, but also if you have anxiety, that can also lead to elevated cortisol levels, which can lead to itching, which can also lead to adrenal fatigue. You can refer to my earlier comments regarding how to balance an unbalanced endocrine system. All right, goddesses, if you've made it this far, thank you so much for your support. Leave a comment down below if you learned anything. Hit the like button and subscribe. It's free. Thanks again so much for watching Sacred Seat TV.